Superman nearly went 20 years without a theatrical release thanks to the failure of Superman 4. That was until 2006, when Superman finally returned to the big screen. Welcome to the Summer of Superman, and hopefully you can join me on this journey through Superman's theatrical roller coaster ride. Last time we saw our beloved son of Krypton, he was battling Nuclear Man and ridding the world of nuclear weapons in 1987. And we wouldn't see him again for 19 years until 2006 with the release of Superman Returns. But before we get to 2006, let's look at how we got there. Prior to Superman 4's release, Cannon was looking to create a Superman 5, supposedly with Albert Pyun as the director, a prolific direct-to-video B-movie director, and the man who gave us the forgotten 1990 Captain America movie. Supposedly, this Superman 5 had Superman die and get resurrected in the shrunken city of Kandor, presumably giving us Brainiac. However, due to Cannon's bankruptcy, the rights reverted back to the Salkinds, and Warner Brothers purchased the rights back from the Salkinds in 1993. 1992's The Death of Superman comic book storyline was a massive success for DC Comics. Warner Brothers wanted to capitalize on this by putting a new Superman movie into production, Superman Reborn. Warner Brothers hired John Peters to produce the film, who then hired Jonathan Lemkin to write the film. Lemkin wrote a story where Lois and Clark have relationship problems and Superman fights Doomsday. When Superman professes his love for Lois Lane, his life force jumps into Lois as he dies, making Lois pregnant. This child grows into an adult Superman within the span of just 3 weeks, and presumably goes on to defeat Doomsday and save the world. Warner Brothers did not like this script. I wonder why. Gregory Portier was hired to rewrite it, and oh my god, if you thought that first original version was bad. This time, Brainiac creates Doomsday with kryptonite blood. Lois and Clark have relationship issues in this version as well, and they are seeing a psychiatrist. Superman eventually gets killed by Doomsday, and this is where it really goes off the wall. An alien named Cadmus kidnaps Superman's corpse and resurrects him. Then Cadmus and Superman team up to defeat Brainiac and Doomsday. However, Superman is powerless and has to wear a robotic suit. And why is he powerless, you might ask? Maybe he needs more time to recover from death and needs more sun rays in him. But no, his powers are gone because he lost his mental discipline, referred to as Fiend Yar. This story ends with Superman in a black suit, and apparently Parasite and Silver Banshee are in this script somewhere. And Kevin Smith was then brought on to rewrite it again, and he thought Portier's script did not respect the Superman mythos. You don't say. Which brings us to probably the most infamous failed Superman project, Superman Lives. Now keep in mind, Kevin Smith was hired to write a preconceived story and not an original story that a famous comic book fan and great comic book writer would actually initially choose to write. John Peters demanded that the story does not feature Superman flying. He did not want Superman to fly in the movie. Smith got around this by introducing the idea of the red-blue blur, which was a concept that you did eventually see in the TV show Smallville. But in this version, it's essentially, you do kind of technically see him fly, but you don't see the actual person fly. You just see a red-blue blur fly across the screen. He also demanded that Superman fight a giant spider in the third act. He forced in a scene where Brainiac fights a polar bear. He gave Brainiac a space dog to help elevate merchandise and toy sales, because toy sales were the most important thing when it came to 90s superhero flicks. He also insisted and wanted Brainiac's robot assistant, Elron, to be a gay R2-D2 with attitude. Yeah, that's a saying. Story-wise, Superman Lives started off pretty similar to Superman Reborn, with Brainiac creating Doomsday and Doomsday killing Superman. But in this version, they also block out the sun, causing Superman to lose his powers throughout the film. A Kryptonian robot known as the Eradicator, not necessarily the Eradicator you're thinking of, resurrects Superman and gives him a suit filled with sun rays to give him his powers while the sun is blocked. He then goes on to defeat Brainiac and Doomsday. The famous Tim Burton, the director of Batman and Batman Returns, came on to direct Superman Lives with a planned release for the summer of 1998. Nicolas Cage was cast to play Superman and Clark Kent. Name redacted was approached to play Lex Luthor, and we'll get back to him later. Christopher Walken was approached to play Brainiac, and Michael Keaton was even involved. However, it remains unclear whether he would have returned as Bruce Wayne or would have been a different character entirely. Tim Burton then rewrote the script. In this version, Lex Luthor and Brainiac would eventually amalgamate into a schizophrenic mega supervillain called Lexiac. And Superman is resurrected by the power of K, a spiritual Kryptonian force. Tim Burton, though, eventually left the project so he could focus on making Sleepy Hollow. After a couple of years with no progress on the film, aspiring screenwriter Alex Ford submitted a new script that was initially accepted by Warner Brothers, but ultimately fell through due to creative differences. As stated by Alex Ford, their audience was not you and me who pay $7 for a theater ticket. It's for the parents who spend $60 on toys and lunchboxes. The $600 million profit from merchandise is more important than the $150 million profit from the box office. Superman Lives, after many years in development and millions of dollars spent in pre-production, was eventually abandoned. Now, moving on to the 2000s, and there were actually two different films originally planned for 2004. First being Batman vs. Superman Asylum. This is about 12 years before the actual Batman vs. Superman that we got. And in this version, it features Batman in a world where Dick Grayson, Alfred, and Commissioner Gordon are all dead, and he's depressed and retired. And then there's also a depressed Superman who recently divorced Lois Lane. Bruce then gets married with Clark as his best man. The Joker then goes on to kill Bruce's new bride, and Batman has to come out of retirement. Clark begins a romance with Lana Lang. Lex Luthor then convinces Bruce that Clark is actually the one responsible for his lover's death. So Batman and Superman fight each other and then realize the manipulation that was happening. Then they go on to defeat Luthor, the Joker, and an incoming meteor shower. Thankfully, though, this was abandoned and Batman moved on to Christopher Nolan. Superman, however, still had a J.J. Abrams project in the works. Abrams' version, somewhat known as Superman Flyboy, was a very big diversion, though, from Superman's classic origin, as Jor-El and his brother Kata-Zor were embroiled in a Kryptonian civil war, and Jor-El had sent his son into space towards Earth right before he got imprisoned. So in this version, Superman wasn't a refugee from a destroyed planet, but rather a refugee from a tyrannical planet. The rest of the origin is pretty much the same. He gets found by the Kents, grows up in Smallville, becomes a reporter, and all of that jazz. And Luthor in this version is a government agent obsessed with UFOs. And then once Superman reveals himself to the world, it attracts the attention of Krypton, leading Katazor's son, Tyzor, to Earth. Superman then dies and goes to Kryptonian heaven, where he visits his father, Jor-El, who committed suicide in Kryptonian prison. He gets resurrected and defeats the evil Kryptonians. Ultimately, like all the previous ones, though, this project was also canceled and abandoned. And after the cancellation of J.J. Abrams' project Superman Flyboy, Bryan Singer pitched his idea for Superman Returns, and Bryan Singer came up with the idea for Superman Returns while filming X2. He presented the idea first to X2 producer Lauren Schuler Donner, who happened to be the wife of Richard Donner, the director of 1978's Superman, and both of the Donners loved it. In terms of casting, Bryan Singer wanted to take the same approach that Donner took in 1978 in hiring an unknown actor to play Superman. An unknown actor named Brandon Routh had previously auditioned for Clark Kent in Smallville, as well as auditioned for J.J. Abrams' Superman Flyboy, and he was eventually hired to play Superman in Superman Returns, with one of the main reasons being his striking resemblance to Christopher Reeve. Name redacted, who was at one point probably my favorite actor when I was in high school, but he probably loved the fact that he was my favorite actor when I was in high school, was hired to play Lex Luthor. Kate Bosworth was miscasted as Lois Lane. Singer then originally offered the role of Jimmy Olsen to Shawn Ashmore, but Shawn declined so he could focus on being Iceman in X-Men The Last Stand. But funnily enough, his twin brother Aaron Ashmore went on to play Jimmy Olsen in the television series Smallville. Other notable cast members include James Marsden as Richard White, Frank Langella as Perry White, Parker Posey as Kitty Kowalski, the new Eve Tessmacher, Cal Penn as a henchman, Sam Huntington ended up playing Jimmy Olsen in the movie, and Tristan Lake LeBeau as Lois's son, Jason. The story of Superman Returns sees Superman disappear for 5 years while he went to investigate the wreckage of his home planet, Krypton. But after finding 0 survivors and almost no remnants, he returns to Earth. Upon returning to Earth, he discovers that Lois Lane has won a Pulitzer Prize, has gotten engaged to Perry White's nephew, Richard, and has a 5-year-old son. Meanwhile, Luthor steals a Kryptonian crystal from the Fortress of Solitude and kryptonite from a museum. Luthor then concocts a plan to create a new continent with these Kryptonian elements so that he can own all of the land on this element, because in this version, much like the original 1978 Superman, Lex Luthor is a mad scientist real estate agent. Lois and her son Jason then get trapped on Luthor's yacht, which helps them reveal the fact that Jason is actually Superman's biological son. A weakened Superman then eventually lifts up this new land, which is made of kryptonite, and throws it into space. Now onto my personal review. I have a lot of fond memories of this movie. I saw it in theaters when I was probably like 8 years old. I honestly didn't even realize it had a negative reputation until I was in college. And even beyond that, this used to be my favorite Superman movie up until only a couple of years ago. One thing that I think Superman Returns does very, very well is transporting the audience into Metropolis. The production design, the overall look and feel of the movie feels like a genuine, fantastical, yet somewhat realistic fictional city that it transports its audience into. It's by far the best looking Daily Planet we have seen yet. The action set pieces are among the best in the franchise. The plane crash sequence in particular might be the greatest Superman action set piece ever placed to film. However, the movie is a little dragged out, so it can get boring between the action set pieces. Brandon Routh does a great job balancing Superman and Clark Kent's mannerisms and personalities. Over time, however, the movie overall hasn't exactly stayed on the same level for me. The story around Jason being Superman's biological son doesn't fully sit well with me nowadays, but it doesn't ruin the movie for me either. However, Superman lifting a giant island made of kryptonite without wearing a protective kryptonite suit does not sit well with me. Plus, even in 2006, this version of Lex Luthor was extremely outdated compared to the Luthors that we were getting in the comic books and the cartoon world, and even on television with Michael Rosenbaum. However, the approach to Luthor makes sense when you look at Bryan Singer's approach to Superman Returns. Bryan Singer was apparently not a big comic book fan. However, 1978's Superman by Richard Donner was one of his biggest inspirations as a filmmaker. And so his approach to Superman Returns was to make a sequel to the Richard Donner Superman movies, not necessarily to make a Superman comic book adapted to live action. Ultimately, though, I do love Superman Returns more than your average fan. It has a great environment, it has great action set pieces, but its story doesn't always mesh and can feel outdated even for its time. I'm still going to give it a thumbs up, but keep in mind that it is also about 30 minutes too long. Thanks for watching this video on Superman Returns, and don't forget to leave your thoughts on the canceled Superman projects and Superman Returns in the comments section down below. And hit that subscribe button and notification bell so you can join the summer of Superman as we move into the Cavill era. Smash that like button and always stay super. Gregory Portier was hired to rewrite. I can't say this name.